Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
A Time for True show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, and today we're going to discuss something that's been plaguing our country: inflation, and social unrest, and drugs. And how do we solve this? Why does it seem like it's not getting better? Are we doing something wrong? Is there something happening that's not leading to the right solution? Is there a misestimation? And so today we're very lucky to have with us someone who's been working and helping and mentoring a lifetime. And Buddha, if we put his pictures up on the screen, I would like to properly introduce him to our viewers. Reverend David Tidman, there you see him. Born and raised in New England and graduating with a degree in alternative therapy and advanced spiritual counseling. He's a graduate of the NYPD Citizens Police Academy and an associate member of the Fraternal Order of Police and the National Latino Officers Association. The Reverend has advanced educational and drug intervention training as an academy and detoxification supervisor of more than 10 years of assisting others with drug addiction, education, and spiritual and moral rehabilitation. Reverend Tidman, as an ordained minister, has counseled in Washington, D.C. and the metro New York area and many churches for over 20 years, helping many, many people. He received the prestigious White House Presidential Volunteer Service Award for his lifetime of works and was invited to participate in a 5-man congressional address about synthetic drugs. He spoke and addressed the interfaith ministers at the Brooklyn Borough Hall, which was organized by then President Adams, now Mayor of New York. He's an advocate for drug education and was present at several United Nations conferences and was and is a director of training for Drug Free World America's chapter, which obtained a 19% reduction in New York City teenage drug abuse in 2016 and received various Drug Free World Awards for his exemplary work in educating against drugs. He's been recognized for stellar results in counseling throughout the eastern United States region. And there you see him with a drug booklet helping someone else, and there with NYPD, National Day Out. So Buddha, let's bring him up live and bid a warm welcome to my right here to Reverend David Tidman. Welcome, Reverend Tidman.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I want to ask you, as a young man How did you decide to pursue this spiritual counseling and educational career that you have?
Well, I spent a lot of time watching my friends and associates at various levels of school fall into a state of disactivity, immorality, and just various protests of the way life went with no answer at all. I didn't know what to do about it, but I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to do anything I could. So I decided to find out how, and that's what led me to it.
Well, makes total sense. You know, as director of Drug Free World America's chapter training division, I want us to cover and for you to tell our viewers about your community engagement goals and, you know, what was your purpose in deterring this drug epidemic?
Well, it falls into a very interesting scenario. It's been my observation, at least, that a surviving community, one that progresses in making things better, survives only as well as its members can predict consequences with enough accuracy to do something about it. And in the presence of drugs, you cannot accurately predict consequences except that you will feel different. The other thing is that, again, in my observation, the largest component of people taking drugs is stress. And in the presence of stress, you start to learn about consequences. But people take drugs because they don't like the stress. Then they can't tell the stress, and they can't predict consequences. So they don't make things work correctly, and very often fall into illegalities, immoralities, poor judgment, and a non-contributing form of life activity.
You know, it's very interesting because you mentioned something, and it's been plaguing our area and actually I think the countrywide. And what you're saying makes so much sense, and I don't know why it's not spoken about more often, but you have all this violence at the schools and people say, well, how could this person go in and shoot up a school which was there for education, innocent people? And so you're saying that the drugs is leading to that consequence.
Well, yes, what happens is and again, this is my observation.
Okay.
Somebody cannot tolerate the stress they feel they're experiencing in life. And so they seek a quick resolution because they don't know what else to do. And drugs is often presented as a way to mitigate the stress.
Makes total sense. You know, I was going to ask you, how do you mentor and implement and guide people on their personal production and their responsibility? How do you use that so that they can produce and be responsible to get success? What is it that you go over with them?
The first thing you have to do is get them acquainted with the idea that there is a better way to deal with stress. Stress comes about when you don't have enough solutions to the barriers that you run into in life. You don't know what to do, it makes you feel stress. You can either deal with the stress directly, or you can try to find something that makes you not feel the stress. And it's not unlike the idea that if you put Novocaine in your foot, it's not a problem to step on a nail, but the nail is still there. And so are the problems in life that produce your stress. So the first thing we do, or the first thing I would do, is orient them to the fact that there is a better way of handling it, and gradually show them that that can be done by educating them and showing them how you don't have to take drugs in order to avoid stress. Actually, stress to a certain component, stress to a certain degree is a necessary thing. It tells you that you need to sharpen up a bit. It tells you need to learn more. It tells you that you need to apply more of a solution that works. Because when you do that, you don't feel the stress. You start feeling some success.
Makes sense, Dave. You know, I was going to ask you, because I know that you implement work ethic and a person really producing something valuable. And so you were talking to me before the show, we were discussing this. How do you feel that actually leads to more of a social and community wellness, having a person having this work ethic and really producing something that's valuable, not just producing anything, because you can shoot somebody and produce something, but something valuable?
Well, that goes into a very simple factor, a very, very simple factor that goes unnoticed. And that is, when you produce something of a known value, when you do something to enable not just yourself but others to survive well, your morale goes up. When you do something correctly and with ethics in mind, you feel better. You feel, the way you feel is a direct relationship to how you make others feel. So if you do something productive and valuable for others that enables their life to get better, you feel better too.
It's very interesting what you're bringing out, because if you look at what has happened in the last few years, you could see that people have not been happy and they've been isolated from each other. So they haven't been able to really interact. So if they can't interact, they can't help each other. And if they're so concerned about themselves only, which unfortunately this COVID did, you know, that, like what you were saying, that they wouldn't have their attention outwardly, it'd be all on themselves, right?
Well, that's another point. This COVID evolution,
right?
That's the word I use for it. The COVID evolution taught people that they can't help others, that they can't do anything about it, that they can't make anything really better except to stand back and wait to see what kind of a consequence is going to happen. When you spoil or eliminate somebody's interest in helping another, you make an enemy. And they'll do unusual solutions when they don't care how you feel, because they think you don't care how they feel. So when you individuate people from being able to help others by telling them there's an insurmountable barrier or villain or evil thing out there, you tell them there's nothing they can do about it except lay down and hope you don't die, you get people who don't care anymore. You get people who have been shown that their contribution has no worth. And so that's how they reflect and deflect that. If they feel their contribution has no worth, neither does yours. So you get people taking drugs and shooting schools and wrapping their arms around the idea that they have no personal value. You get catastrophes because they're not contributing anything of real value to others.
It's so, you know, what you're saying makes so much sense. It actually, even to me, brought something to mind I never thought about in terms of inflation. Because inflation, to me, is like, gets everything so expensive and it doesn't seem like there's enough of it, but people want more and more money. But it's interesting, because as you were bringing out what you told me and what we were sharing with our viewers, is if a person has an outlook on others, they would, I would feel, care more, right? They would have more caring.
Yep.
So if they have more caring, it probably would make sense that they probably would say, well, you know, maybe I shouldn't charge so much, because if I can't afford it, how could they afford it, right?
Yep.
And so there'd be a more equity in the world. So, I was going to ask you, because this is my next question to you. So, with that idea of caring and value, how could a person watching this show, what would you tell them to produce so that they can feel like, yeah, I can do something about inflation. I can do something about violence. What would you tell them?
Whatever you're doing, learn to do it well enough to help somebody else. Don't just do it so you can buy your groceries. Don't just do it so that you can go to sleep at night. Do it knowing that what you're doing is now enabling somebody else to make their life better too. When somebody gets involved in the notion that their exchange in life, their contribution towards the well-being of themselves and others is of little or no worth, then, like I said, they don't care, and they make others feel like that too. When that happens, you get into scarcities. One person stops producing what they've been doing because it doesn't make any difference, and the next guy goes, well, I need to make more money, I'll raise my price. So the next guy goes, I can't afford what he's doing, I'll have to raise my prices too. And it's a vicious circle of a snake eating its tail. Now, you can break that cycle, you can break that thing very simply by ramping up, if you will, strengthening your resolve to produce whatever you do with integrity. Produce what you do with more than just me and my house involved, but produce what you're doing with the idea that it's contributing those around you to survive better as well. Where you get into inflation, it's because somebody out there, we won't say who, somebody out there is promoting heavily the scarcity of what you need to go on with your life. Now it becomes a struggle and you get stress.
So in other words, what you're saying is there are certain segments that could be promoting the scarcities so their product could be raised in price, causing the inflation.
Yeah.
And causing the stress in people, so people can't be home with their families, so the kids have no leadership or guidance from their parents, and we start getting the problems that we're seeing in the society. Am I surmising pretty much?
That's pretty much it. When you produce a situation where the general regard for your ability to survive and do well is embraced in a condition of scarcity, and you feel the necessity to do something unusual to offset the scarcity, you make yourself scarce to those people that it matters to. They get a little bit scarce in their idea of being able to survive, and pretty soon unusual solutions and weird handlings go into effect because they think that there's a scarcity when there really isn't. The only scarcity there really is a scarcity of willingness to apply integrity and honesty in producing what you're doing.
Right, to really care and to really see that someone else is going to get what you produce, and it should be a good thing because you'd want that in return.
Well, people get paid for a product or service that is of good quality. It enhances their well-being or their living conditions or their family, and it's worth something to them, so they'll pay for it. And they'll do that, you get paid, you feel good about it, you do more of the same. Their life gets better and their integrity increases. Don't just think you're making something to put on the shelf that will be paid for by some unknown circumstance. Make that thing and know that it's a good product and will help others. They'll find it.
Absolutely. And how do you see, one of the things that I get so many people talking to me about and complaining about is corruption, and that they hear something but it's not really true. And they get frustrated because they don't know who to believe anymore. And then you see all these things happening in the society, and you wonder, is that taking away our democracy? Is that affecting our freedoms? Is that affecting our ability to be united? You know, what would you say about that, about the effect of this false data or misleading data or corruption, or like what you're talking about before? How is that affecting our country?
Well, first of all, this broadcasted condition of corruption is not as great and embracive as it sounds.
Okay.
There are more good people in this world by far than there are evil and bad people.
Okay.
It's just the evil and bad ones are a lot noisier.
More promoted.
Oh, yeah. And they make it so that you have a hard time knowing who to believe. Who am I going to understand? Who am I going to believe? Do I understand the newspapers? Do I understand my neighbors?
You generalize it.
It becomes some broad, unthinkable generality.
That makes sense.
And so you're left to your own resources. Where corruption comes in, again, the stress of overcoming your barriers in life gets to a point where somebody feels they have to do something extraordinary or unusual to overcome what they feel are barriers to their well-being, even if whether they're real or imaginary. They consider that the solution to their barriers, the solution to their scarcity of satisfaction in what they're doing, is to do something that they haven't been doing, whether it's morally correct or corrupt or unusual or just plain stupid. The thing is, integrity and honesty is something that's native to a person. You feel better when you do it right. You feel very good when you're doing it honestly, because honesty is a part of a person and dishonesty is not. So you get into corruption, it creates scarcities because it's not being done honestly. See, scarcity is brought about with corruption or dishonesty or untruths. To solve the scarcity, a person will think that they have to do something that they haven't been doing, and they haven't been doing dishonest things. So they start doing that. Then they begin to restrain themselves because they know it's wrong. Now you get more scarcity, and the corruption comes in because they still have to survive somehow. It's a vicious circle. What you have to do is get somebody oriented to the fact that they can recover their integrity. They can reactivate their honesty. They can start doing things that actually benefit themselves, their others, their family. And it doesn't involve corruption. You can take a look at it. Corruption is just a severe violation of those things that have been established as productive of well-being for yourself and others.
Absolutely. You know, it's very interesting because what you're saying makes sense because if we communicated more, which is probably under the definition of community in the dictionary, probably is derived from communication or more of a in common agreement and harmony to surviving, we'd be more of a community and we could achieve what you're saying, and there'd be more honesty because we would see that we really, like you said, like, you know, I run a drug education program like you have helped and other people have helped, and we've all done that together with the idea that all of us have kids and we don't want our kids to be addicted. We don't want our kids to lose their futures or their ability to reason and to choose the right path, not to get called in the middle of the night by the police that our child has done something wrong. It makes total sense what you say. So let me ask you a question, because probably the viewers are out there say, yeah, I agree with that, but then why does this seem to continue in the country? What is the reason it seems that even though the majority of us are trying to do this, is there some other influence or third influence that gains from what's happening between us?
Sure there is.
Tell us about that.
There are people, this is a sad point, but there are people in this world who actively don't want to care about others. Sad but true. There are people whose motivation in life is to achieve and obtain more personal gain based on the false idea that nobody else can have it. What good would it be if you had all the money in the world and you couldn't spend it? What's the point? All the money, that's like being king of the world and you can't trust anybody. What world is that? Same thing. If you educate your children, your family, you educate students into knowing it solidly that an honest life can result in satisfaction and abundance, and you make sure they know about it and don't pay attention to the people that say the only way to get ahead is to do it dishonestly, then you'll get somewhere. The way to eliminate corruption is just to strengthen integrity, push honesty in, and teach it to the people that are going to carry it into the future. Make corruption not part of a tradition, but a thing of the past.
We can make a mantra. Not corruption, but production.
Perfect.
Do you like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Production, so let me ask you, not corruption.
Production, not corruption. So you know what? Let me ask you something, because you know, you brought out a lot of good points, and people are so concerned with inflation, with the violence, with the drugs. What would you like to leave with our viewers as a concluding statement on how they can deal with this, and so together we can resolve this and have the kind of world that we want to have?
Well, that's very simple. You have to let them become convinced that they can educate others into doing it correctly, that they can take part in workshops, classes, presentations, education, written material. Make it more available to them than the corruptive activities. Make it more a tradition of correct handling and benefit, and exceeding the volume and noise of doing it wrong.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, Reverend Tidman, I want to thank you for coming on the show. And, you know, it's been a pleasure to have you. And for those of you watching, let's heed Reverend Tidman's advice. Let's communicate with each other so we can see that the world is really not so scary. Let's produce something that helps somebody else. And if we want to do better in life, I guess let's just produce more of it so that more people would want that, because it's going to help them. And probably that's the best way to market, is give people what they really want and need, but not to destroy them, but to help them. And let's solve this inflation. Let's help our community leaders and politicians to solve what's going on so they can be happy too, because they want to feel like they produce a good product with the society. And let's move forward. And until the next episode of Time for Truth Show, have a very communicative, productive week. We'll see you next show. Have a good night.
This show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet